Sometimes the most powerful person in a room isn't sitting at the head of the boardroom table. Sometimes they're emptying the trash cans after everyone goes home. Maria Santos learned this truth on a Tuesday morning that would change everything. While executives in $1,000 suits struggled to save their company from financial ruin, a 23-year-old woman in a janitor's uniform quietly held the key to their salvation. She spoke 7 languages fluently, had a photographic memory, and possessed something far more valuable than any MBA degree hanging on the wall. She actually listened to what people said when they thought no one important was watching. This is the story of how the daughter of a night shift janitor became the unlikely hero who rescued a $30 million deal, exposed a web of corporate deception, and proved that intelligence has nothing to do with the clothes you wear or the office you occupy. It's about recognizing genius in unexpected places and understanding that sometimes the most crucial conversations happen in elevators, hallways, and break rooms when the cameras aren't rolling and the executives think they're safe to speak freely. What you're about to read isn't just another corporate success story. It's a testament to the power of being underestimated, the value of genuine human connection, and the extraordinary things that happen when someone finally gets the chance to show the world what they're truly capable of. Maria Santos pushed her cleaning cart down the marble hallway of Global Tech Industries at exactly 6:47 p.m., just as she had every weekday for the past 3 years. The executive floor was nearly empty now, save for the occasional workaholic burning the midnight oil or the security guard making his rounds. Most people barely noticed her presence, which suited Maria just fine. Being invisible had taught her more about corporate America than any business school ever could. At 23, Maria possessed an unusual combination of gifts that nobody at Global Tech knew existed. She spoke 7 languages fluently, had graduated valedictorian from community college with a degree in international business, and could recall conversations word for word months after hearing them. But none of that mattered when you wore a gray uniform with your name stitched on the pocket and pushed a mop bucket for a living. Her father, Roberto Santos, had worked the night shift in the same building for 15 years. When Maria couldn't afford to continue her education at a 4-year university, Roberto had gotten her a job with the cleaning company. Mija, he had said, sometimes you have to start at the bottom to understand how the whole building works. What he hadn't expected was that his daughter would turn her janitorial position into a masterclass in corporate intelligence gathering. Maria had learned to time her cleaning route perfectly with the rhythms of the executive floor. She knew that Richard Morrison, the chief financial officer, always stayed late on Tuesdays to review quarterly reports. She knew that Jennifer Walsh, the head of international relations, conducted her most sensitive phone calls after hours when she thought the building was empty. And she knew that CEO David Chun had been desperately trying to close a $30 million merger with a Japanese consortium for the past 6 months, a deal that could save the company from the financial troubles that had been mounting since their last product launch failed spectacularly. What the executives didn't realize was that Maria understood every word of their supposedly private conversations. When they spoke in Spanish about their concerns over the Latino market penetration, she understood. When they switched to French during discussions about their European expansion, she followed along perfectly. And when they received calls from international partners in Japanese, German, Portuguese, or Mandarin, Maria absorbed every detail while quietly emptying wastebaskets and dusting furniture. On this particular Tuesday evening, Maria was cleaning the conference room adjacent to CEO Chen's office when she overheard a conversation that made her stop dead in her tracks. Jennifer Walsh was on another one of her after-hours phone calls, and this one was different. She was speaking in rapid Japanese, her voice tense and urgent. "The Americans don't suspect anything," Walsh was saying. "Chen thinks the deal is moving forward smoothly, but Yamamoto-san has already decided to pull out. They're just waiting for the right moment to announce it without losing face. Yes, I understand the commission structure you've arranged with Yamamoto's competitor. The timing will be perfect." Maria felt her heart pound as she continued to listen, pretending to arrange papers on the conference table. Walsh was describing an elaborate scheme to sabotage Global Tech's merger by feeding information to Yamamoto Industries' main competitor, Sakura Corporation. In exchange for inside information about Global Tech's negotiation strategy and financial vulnerabilities, Walsh would receive a substantial payment from Sakura when they swooped in to acquire Global Tech's assets at a fraction of their value after the merger collapsed. The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, during which Walsh outlined specific details about how she had been deliberately mistranslating key documents, providing misleading information about Global Tech's market position, and even sharing confidential financial data with Sakura's representatives. Maria listened to every word, her mind racing as she began to understand the full scope of the betrayal. When the call ended, Maria quietly finished her cleaning duties and moved on to the next office, but her mind was spinning with the implications of what she had just heard. Global Tech employed over 3,000 people, many of them immigrants and first-generation Americans like herself and her father. If the company collapsed due to Walsh's sabotage, all of those jobs would disappear. Her father would lose the position he had held faithfully for 15 years. The pension fund that supported dozens of retired employees would evaporate. But who would believe the word of a janitor's daughter against one of the company's most senior executives? Walsh had been with Global Tech for 8 years and was widely respected for her international business acumen. She had an MBA from Wharton, spoke 5 languages herself, and had successfully negotiated dozens of international deals. Maria, on the other hand, was a community college graduate whose main credential was her ability to clean offices without breaking anything. As Maria continued her rounds that evening, she began to formulate a plan. She had been documenting interesting conversations in a private journal for months, partly out of curiosity about how corporate decisions were made and partly as a way to practice her language skills. Now she realized that her detailed notes about various meetings and phone calls might be the key to exposing Walsh's scheme. The next morning, Maria arrived at work 2 hours early and used her master key to access Walsh's office. She wasn't planning to steal anything, but she needed to understand more about the merger documents and Walsh's communications with both Yamamoto Industries and Sakura Corporation. What she found in Walsh's desk drawers and computer files exceeded her worst expectations. Walsh had been systematically undermining the merger for months. Email records showed regular communication with Sakura executives, including detailed briefings on Global Tech's negotiation strategy and financial projections. Bank statements revealed a series of payments from a consulting firm that served as a front for Sakura's intelligence operations. Most damning of all, Maria found translated versions of key merger documents that had been deliberately altered to make Global Tech appear less financially stable and less strategically valuable than they actually were. Maria photographed everything with her phone, being careful to return all documents to their exact original positions. She had spent enough time cleaning offices to know that executives noticed when things were out of place, and she couldn't afford to alert Walsh to any suspicion of discovery. Over the following weeks, Maria expanded her surveillance operation. She began arriving even earlier and staying later, using her access to different parts of the building to gather more information about the merger negotiations. She listened in on video conferences, photographed email correspondences, and even recorded some of Walsh's phone conversations using an app on her smartphone. The picture that emerged was of a conspiracy that went deeper than Maria had initially realized. Walsh wasn't acting alone. She had recruited 2 other executives, including someone in the accounting department who had been manipulating financial reports to make Global Tech's position appear weaker than it actually was. The 3 conspirators were working in coordination with Sakura Corporation to ensure that the Yamamoto merger would fail at the most damaging possible moment, clearing the way for Sakura to acquire Global Tech's most valuable assets. But Maria also discovered something else in her investigation. Global Tech was actually in a much stronger financial position than anyone realized, including CEO Chun himself. The manipulated reports had painted such a grim picture that Chun had been negotiating from a position of perceived weakness, offering concessions and terms that were far more favorable to Yamamoto than necessary. If the real financial data were presented properly, Global Tech could command a much higher price and better terms in any merger or acquisition scenario. As Maria pieced together the full scope of the situation, she realized that she had stumbled upon something much larger than simple corporate sabotage. She had discovered a sophisticated scheme of corporate espionage and insider trading that, if exposed properly, could not only save the Yamamoto merger but could also strengthen Global Tech's position significantly. The question was how to get this information to the right people without revealing her own unauthorized investigation. The answer came to her during a conversation she overheard between CEO Chun and his assistant. Chun was lamenting the fact that he couldn't find a qualified translator for some critical documents that Yamamoto had sent in technical Japanese. His usual translator was on medical leave, and the backup options were either unavailable or lacked the specific technical expertise needed to handle the complex legal and financial terminology. Maria realized that this was her opportunity. She had been studying technical translation as part of her self-directed business education, and she was confident that she could handle the documents in question. More importantly, if she could gain access to Chun as a translator, she might be able to find a way to share her findings about Walsh's betrayal without revealing how she had obtained the information. The next morning, Maria made a decision that would change everything. Instead of putting on her gray janitor's uniform, she dressed in the best professional outfit she owned and walked into Global Tech's main reception area. She asked to speak with CEO Chen's assistant about a translation services opportunity. The receptionist looked at her with obvious confusion. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," Maria replied in perfect, unaccented English. "But I believe Mr. Chun needs someone who can translate technical documents from Japanese. I'm fluent in Japanese and have experience with business and legal terminology." The receptionist's eyebrows rose. "And you are?" "Maria Santos. I specialize in corporate translation services." It wasn't entirely a lie. She had been doing freelance translation work online for small businesses to earn extra money beyond her janitorial salary. After a brief phone call, the receptionist directed Maria to the executive floor, where she found herself in the familiar surroundings of the offices she had been cleaning for 3 years. But now she was walking through the same hallways as a potential business consultant rather than as invisible cleaning staff. Chen's assistant, Patricia Wong, greeted her with professional courtesy and explained the translation challenge. Yamamoto Industries had sent a detailed technical proposal that outlined their integration plans for the merger, but the document contained specialized terminology that their usual translation services couldn't handle adequately. "We need someone who understands both the technical aspects of our business and the cultural nuances of Japanese business communication," Wong explained. "The merger negotiations are at a critical stage, and any misunderstanding could be catastrophic." Maria nodded confidently. "I'd be happy to review the documents and provide you with a sample translation to demonstrate my capabilities." Wong handed her a folder containing several pages of dense Japanese text mixed with technical diagrams and financial projections. Maria scanned the documents quickly, noting that they contained exactly the kind of information that Walsh had been misrepresenting in her communications with both merger partners. "How quickly could you complete a full translation?" Wong asked. "I could have a complete, detailed translation ready by tomorrow morning." Maria arrived at Global Tech the next morning carrying a leather portfolio she had borrowed from her neighbor, wearing her most professional blazer, and feeling more nervous than she had ever felt in her life. She had spent the entire night preparing not just the translation, but a careful strategy for how to reveal what she had discovered without immediately implicating herself in unauthorized surveillance. Patricia Wong escorted her to a small conference room where CEO David Chun was waiting with 2 other executives she recognized from her cleaning rounds: Marcus Webb, the chief operating officer, and, surprisingly, Jennifer Walsh herself. Maria's heart nearly stopped when she saw Walsh sitting at the conference table, but she forced herself to maintain a calm, professional demeanor. "Ms. Santos," Chun said, rising to shake her hand. "Patricia tells me you can help us with some challenging translation work. I have to admit, I'm impressed that you were able to respond so quickly to our request." Maria smiled and placed her portfolio on the table. "I believe translation is about more than just converting words from one language to another. It's about understanding the cultural and business context behind the communication. When I reviewed your documents, I realized there were several layers of meaning that a standard translation might miss." Walsh leaned forward with interest. "That's exactly the kind of insight we need. We've been struggling to understand some of the nuances in Yamamoto's recent communications." They seem to be saying one thing in their official correspondence, but some of their informal comments suggest they might have different intentions. Maria felt a chill as Walsh spoke. The woman was sitting 3 feet away from her, completely unaware that Maria understood exactly what Yamamoto's different intentions were because she had heard Walsh discussing them during her sabotage phone calls. Actually, Maria said carefully, I think some of the confusion might stem from earlier translations that didn't capture the full meaning of what Yamamoto has been trying to communicate. Let me walk you through what I've found. She opened her portfolio and began with the most recent documents, the ones Wong had given her the day before. Yamamoto's latest proposal is actually much more favorable to global tech than your previous translations indicated. They're not just interested in a merger. They're specifically interested in global tech's technological capabilities and market position in ways that suggest they value the company much more highly than current negotiations reflect. Chen frowned. That doesn't match what we've been hearing from our international relations team. Jennifer, didn't you tell me that Yamamoto was having second thoughts about the valuation? Walsh's expression remained perfectly composed, but Maria noticed a slight tension in her voice as she responded. The communications I've been receiving have been somewhat ambiguous. Perhaps MS. Santos can help clarify some of the mixed messages we've been getting. I'd be happy to, Maria said, turning to the next section of her presentation. But first, I think it's important to understand that there may have been some systematic issues with how certain documents have been translated over the past few months. She pulled out copies of 3 key documents that have been central to the merger negotiations. I was able to obtain copies of the original Japanese versions of these agreements through my research, and I noticed some significant discrepancies between what Yamamoto actually wrote and what appears in the English translations that have been guiding your negotiation strategy. Marcus Webb looked concerned. What kind of discrepancies? Maria had carefully planned this moment. She needed to reveal the mistranslations without immediately accusing Walsh of deliberate sabotage. The differences are substantial enough that I believe they may be affecting the entire direction of your negotiations. For example, in this section where the English translation says Yamamoto is concerned about global tech's long-term viability, the Japanese actually says they are impressed by global tech's resilience in challenging market conditions. Chen's eyebrows rose sharply. That's completely different. It gets more significant, Maria continued, showing another document. This financial projection that was translated as showing declining confidence in merger benefits actually expresses enthusiasm for expanded market opportunities through strategic partnership. The meaning is essentially reversed. Walsh shifted in her seat. These documents are highly technical. It's possible that our previous translators simply lacked the specific expertise to handle the nuanced terminology. Maria nodded sympathetically. That's certainly possible. Technical translation is extremely challenging, especially when it involves both business strategy and cultural communication patterns. That's why I also prepared some additional analysis that might help explain how these miscommunications developed. She turned to a new section of her presentation, one that had required all of her courage to prepare. I also found some interesting patterns in email communications and subsidiary documents that suggest someone may have been providing Yamamoto with information that doesn't match Global Tech's actual financial position. The room fell silent. Shin leaned forward. What do you mean? The financial data that Yamamoto has been receiving about Global Tech appears to be significantly different from your actual performance metrics. They've been given projections that make the company appear much weaker than it actually is, which would explain why they've been negotiating from a position of reduced confidence in the partnership. Marcus Webb looked alarmed. Are you saying someone has been deliberately feeding them false information? I'm saying that there are discrepancies between what Yamamoto believes about Global Tech's position and what your actual financial situation appears to be, Maria replied carefully. Whether those discrepancies are accidental or intentional, I can't say. But they've definitely been affecting the negotiation dynamics. Walsh's composure was beginning to crack slightly. MS. Santos, I appreciate your translation work, but I'm not sure you're qualified to make assessments about our international business communication strategy. These relationships are extremely complex and sensitive. Maria looked directly at Walsh for the first time since entering the room. You're absolutely right that these relationships are complex. That's why I think it's so important to make sure everyone is working with accurate information. She pulled out the final section of her presentation. I prepared a comprehensive comparison between what Yamamoto actually thinks they're negotiating for and what Global Tech believes they're offering. The differences are significant enough that I believe both companies may have been operating under false assumptions about what the other party wants from this merger. Chen studied the documents Maria had prepared, his expression growing more troubled with each page. Jennifer, have you seen this analysis before? No, Walsh replied tightly. And I have to question where Ms. Santos obtained some of these internal communications. Some of this information should be confidential. Maria had anticipated this challenge. I work with several translation services that specialize in international business communications. When companies are preparing for major negotiations, it's not unusual for multiple consulting firms to be working with similar documents. I was able to cross-reference translations from several sources to identify the inconsistencies. It wasn't entirely true, but it wasn't entirely false either. She did work with online translation services, and she had been careful to frame her analysis in terms that could plausibly have come from legitimate business research. Chen was still studying her documents. Marcus, can you have our accounting department verify some of these financial projections? I want to understand how much of this discrepancy is based on actual data. Of course, Webb replied, though it might take a few days to track down all the source documents. Actually, Maria said quietly, I might be able to help with that too. Part of my preparation for this translation project involved researching Global Tech's public filings and market position. I found some interesting patterns that might be relevant to your verification process. She had prepared for this moment as well. Over the past weeks, her investigation had revealed that the accounting manipulations Walsh had arranged were sophisticated but not comprehensive. The real financial data still existed. It had simply been buried under layers of misleading reports and projections. What kind of patterns? Chen asked. Maria opened her portfolio to a new section. Discrepancies between your public SEC filings and the internal projections that appear to have been shared with Yamamoto. Your public filings actually show much stronger performance metrics than what Yamamoto seems to believe about your company. Walsh stood up abruptly. Mr. Chen, I really think we should be careful about accepting analysis from an outside consultant who may not understand the full context of our international negotiations. Perhaps we should continue this discussion after our regular team has had a chance to review these materials. But Chen was already absorbed in Maria's analysis. No, I want to understand this now. Ms. Santos, you're saying that Yamamoto has been given financial information about our company that doesn't match our actual performance. That's correct, Maria replied. And I believe the same misleading information may have been provided to other potential partners, which could explain some of the challenges you've been facing in international markets generally. Marcus Webb looked at Walsh with obvious concern. Jennifer, your department has been handling most of the international financial communications. Do you have any insight into how these discrepancies might have developed? Walsh's professional mask was beginning to slip. These are complicated matters that involve multiple departments and consultants. I don't think it's fair to suggest that any single person or team is responsible for communication issues that may have developed over several months. Maria could see that Walsh was trying to diffuse the situation and deflect specific accountability. She realized this was her moment to present the most critical information. Actually, she said, I think I might have identified the source of at least some of the communication problems. The room fell completely silent. Chen looked at her expectantly. I found evidence that someone has been providing confidential information about Global Tech's negotiation strategy to Sakura Corporation, which is Yamamoto's primary competitor in the Japanese market. The bombshell landed exactly as Maria had hoped. Walsh went pale, Marcus Webb looked shocked, and Chen's expression shifted from confusion to alarm. What evidence? Chen demanded. Maria had spent hours deciding how to present this information without revealing her unauthorized surveillance. Finally, she had settled on an approach that was technically truthful, even if it didn't reveal the complete source of her knowledge. Email communications and financial records that suggest someone with access to confidential merger documents has been sharing information with consultants who work for Sakura Corporation. The pattern suggests that Sakura has been receiving detailed briefings about your negotiation strategy, your financial vulnerabilities, and your timeline for closing the Yamamoto deal. The silence in the conference room stretched for what felt like an eternity. Maria could hear her own heartbeat as she looked around the table at three of Global Tech's most powerful executives, knowing that what she said next would either vindicate her investigation or destroy any chance she had of ever being taken seriously in the corporate world. Shin leaned forward, his voice carefully controlled. "Miss Santos, these are extremely serious accusations. I need you to be very specific about what evidence you have and how you obtained it." Maria had rehearsed this moment dozens of times in her mind, but now that it was actually happening, she felt the weight of everything she was about to reveal. She looked directly at Walsh, who was sitting rigid in her chair, clearly calculating her own response strategy. "Over the past several weeks," Maria began carefully, "I've been working on translation projects for multiple companies that are involved in Japanese market negotiations. During that research, I noticed patterns in communications that suggested someone with detailed knowledge of Global Tech's merger strategy was providing information to Sakura Corporation's representatives. It was a carefully constructed truth that didn't reveal her actual surveillance activities. She had indeed been doing freelance translation work, and her janitor access had allowed her to gather information that could plausibly have come from working with competing companies." "What kind of patterns?" Marcus Webb asked. Maria opened her portfolio to a section she had prepared with extreme care. Email communications from Sakura executives that reference specific details about Global Tech's negotiation timeline, financial projections, and strategic concerns that should only be known to people with direct access to your internal merger team. She pulled out printed copies of emails that she had photographed from Walsh's computer. "These communications show that Sakura has been receiving weekly briefings about your negotiation progress with Yamamoto, including advance notice of any concessions you were planning to offer and detailed information about your financial pressures." Shin examined the documents, his expression growing darker with each page. "How did you obtain these communications?" "Through my translation work with Japanese companies," Maria replied. "When you work as a freelance translator, you often see communications from multiple companies involved in the same business sectors. I began to notice that information about Global Tech was appearing in contexts where it shouldn't have been available." Walsh finally spoke, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Mr. Chun, I have to object to this entire line of questioning. Ms. Santos is making accusations based on documents that she may have obtained illegally, and she's making connections that could be completely coincidental. Just because information about our company appears in Japanese business communications doesn't mean there's any conspiracy." But Chin was studying one particular email with intense focus. "Jennifer, this email specifically references the financial concessions we discussed in our closed-door meeting last Thursday. You, Marcus, and I were the only people in that room. How would Sakura Corporation know about those discussions?" Maria held her breath as she watched Walsh struggle to formulate a response. This was the moment she had been building toward, but she needed Walsh to reveal herself rather than have Maria make direct accusations that could be dismissed. "There could be any number of explanations," Walsh said, but her voice lacked its usual confidence. "Corporate intelligence gathering is common in international business. They could have sources throughout the industry." Marcus Webb was now studying the emails as well. "Jennifer, these communications are incredibly detailed. They reference specific dollar amounts and timeline adjustments that we've discussed in executive meetings. This level of detail suggests someone with direct access to our internal planning." Maria could see that the momentum was shifting in her favor, but she knew she needed to provide even more concrete evidence to make the case irrefutable. She turned to another section of her presentation. "I also found evidence of financial payments from Sakura Corporation to consulting firms that appear to be connected to the information sharing," she said, pulling out bank records she had photographed from Walsh's desk. Walsh's face went completely white. "Where did you get those documents?" "Through my translation work," Maria repeated calmly. "When Japanese companies hire consulting services for competitive intelligence, they often need translation services for their financial communications." Chun looked at the bank records with growing alarm. "These payments are substantial, and they're being made to a consulting firm that I've never heard of. Marcus, do you know anything about Global Tech working with Meridian International Consulting?" Webb shook his head. No, I've never heard of them. Maria had done extensive research on Meridian International. It was a shell company that existed primarily on paper, with a registered address in a business park, and no legitimate consulting clients other than its role as a conduit for payments between Sakura Corporation and global tech insiders. Jennifer, Chin said quietly, turning to face Walsh directly. Meridian International has been receiving payments of $25,000 per month from Sakura Corporation for the past 6 months. That coincides exactly with the timeline of our merger negotiations with Yamamoto. Do you have any explanation for that? Walsh's composure finally collapsed entirely. David, I think there may be some misunderstanding about the nature of these consulting arrangements. International business relationships often involve complex structures that can appear suspicious if you don't understand the full context. Then, explain the context, Chen replied firmly. But Maria could see that Walsh was trapped. The evidence was too specific and too comprehensive for any reasonable explanation other than deliberate corporate espionage. Walsh had been caught, and everyone in the room knew it. Marcus Webb was studying another document from Maria's portfolio. Jennifer, this email suggests that Sakura Corporation has been planning to make an acquisition offer for global tech immediately after our merger with Yamamoto collapses. Did you know about their acquisition interest? Walsh didn't answer immediately, which was answer enough for Chun. He stood up from the table and walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline while processing the magnitude of what had just been revealed. Ms. Santos, he said without turning around, in your analysis of this situation, what do you believe Sakura Corporation's ultimate goal has been? Maria had prepared extensively for this question. Based on the communications I've reviewed, it appears that Sakura has been working to ensure that your merger with Yamamoto fails at the most financially damaging possible moment. They want global tech to be in a weakened position when they make their own acquisition offer, which would allow them to acquire your technology and market position at a significant discount. And someone inside our company has been helping them accomplish this goal, Chin said, still looking out the window. That appears to be the case, Maria replied. Chin turned back to face the table. Jennifer, I'm going to ask you directly. Have you been providing information to Sakura Corporation about our merger negotiations? The room fell silent again. Walsh looked around the table at 3 faces that were waiting for her response. Finally, she straightened in her chair and seemed to make a decision. David, I think you should understand that this entire situation is much more complicated than Ms. Santos is suggesting. Global tech has been in financial trouble for months, and the Yamamoto merger was never going to solve our fundamental problems. Sakura Corporation offers a much more realistic path to preserving jobs and maintaining the company's technological development. It wasn't quite an admission, but it was close enough. Chin's expression hardened. That wasn't what I asked you, Jennifer. I asked if you've been sharing confidential information with Sakura Corporation. Walsh stood up from the table. I think I need to speak with my attorney before we continue this conversation. I think that's an excellent idea, Chin replied. Marcus, please have security escort Jennifer to her office to collect her personal belongings. Make sure they supervise the collection process to ensure that no company materials leave the building. As Walsh left the conference room under security escort, Maria felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. She had successfully exposed the corporate espionage scheme, but now she had to face the consequences of her own unauthorized investigation. Chin sat back down at the table and looked at her with an expression that was difficult to read. Ms. Santos, I want you to understand that I'm grateful for the information you've provided, but I'm also concerned about how you obtained some of these documents. I need you to be completely honest with me about your investigative methods. Maria had prepared for this moment as well. Mr. Chun, I understand your concern. I want to assure you that I didn't engage in any illegal activities to gather this information. I've been working as a freelance translator for several companies involved in Japanese market negotiations, and I began to notice patterns that suggested someone was sharing confidential information inappropriately. It was technically true, even if it didn't reveal the complete story of her surveillance activities. She had indeed been doing translation work, and she had indeed noticed patterns, even if her primary source of information had been her access to the building as a janitor. The financial documents you showed us, Marcus Webb interjected. those would be very difficult to obtain through legitimate translation work. Maria took a deep breath. This was the moment where she had to decide how much of her story to reveal. Mr. Webb, I should tell you that my connection to global tech goes deeper than just translation work. My father, Roberto Santos, has been working as a janitor in this building for 15 years. I've been working with the same cleaning company for the past 3 years. Chen's eyebrows rose sharply. You're saying you work here as a janitor? I was working here as a janitor, Maria corrected. But I've also been building a freelance translation business on the side. My background is actually in international business, and I speak 7 languages fluently. When I noticed information about global tech appearing in unusual contexts during my translation work, I realized I might be in a unique position to understand what was happening. The revelation changed the entire dynamic in the room. Chun and Webb exchanged glances as they processed this new information. So you've had access to this building and these offices while working in a janitorial capacity, Chun said slowly. Yes, Maria replied. But I want to emphasize that I never accessed any information illegally. Everything I've presented to you today could have been obtained through legitimate translation work and public research. It was a carefully parsed truth that protected her from accusations of breaking and entering while acknowledging her unusual access to information. Marcus Webb leaned forward. Maria, you speak 7 languages fluently, and you have a background in international business. But you've been working as a janitor? I graduated from community college with a degree in international business. But I couldn't afford to continue to afford. Chun stood up from the table. Jennifer, your department would have access to that kind of information. What do you know about this? Walsh's composure finally cracked completely. Mr. Chun, I think Ms. Santos may be making accusations that go far beyond her qualifications or expertise. I recommend that we end this meeting and have our security team investigate how she obtained access to confidential information. But Chun was no longer listening to Walsh. He was studying Maria's documents with the intensity of someone who had just realized that everything he thought he knew about his business situation might be wrong. Ms. Santos, he said quietly, do you have specific evidence of who has been providing information to Sakura Corporation? Maria took a deep breath. This was the moment she had been preparing for since the night she first overheard Walsh's treacherous phone call. Yes, she said simply. I do, replied, along with cultural context notes that might help Mr. Chun understand the subtleties of what Yamamoto is actually proposing. Wong scheduled her to return the following day to present her translation directly to CEO Chun. As Maria left the building that afternoon, she realized that she had just bought herself 24 hours to prepare the most important presentation of her life. She wouldn't just be translating documents. She would be exposing a conspiracy that threatened to destroy the company and everyone who depended on it. That night, Maria worked until dawn, preparing not just a translation of Yamamoto's proposal, but a comprehensive analysis of how the merger negotiations had been systematically sabotaged. She cross-referenced Walsh's mistranslated documents with the authentic Yamamoto communications, documented the financial manipulations that had been distorting Global Tech's apparent market position, and prepared a detailed timeline of how the conspiracy had unfolded. By morning, she had assembled a presentation that would either save Global Tech or end her career before it had really begun. Either way, she knew there was no turning back.